December 16, 1944. Frozen forests in Belgium. American soldiers huddling in foxholes as German tanks roll through morning fog. The enemy everyone thought was finished has just launched the largest counteroffensive of the Western War. Thousands of men are trapped. Supply lines are cut. Entire divisions are collapsing. And back at Allied headquarters, commanders are scrambling with a single desperate question. How fast can anyone strike back? Most speak in terms of days, maybe weeks. One general says 48 hours. The room goes silent. Because that general, George S. Patton, has just promised something impossible. And in that moment, he proves exactly why he spent the entire war commanding armies but never commanding the entire war. This is the story of a decision made 1 year earlier. A decision about who would lead the invasion of France. A decision that shaped every battle from Normandy to Berlin. A decision that cost thousands of American lives. And a decision almost no one talks about honestly. December 7, 1943. General George C. Marshall sits in his office in Washington as Army Chief of Staff. A message arrives from President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The president has just returned from Tehran where he met with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin face to face. The tone of the message carries the kind of finality that turns ordinary paper into history. Roosevelt has made his decision. The decision about who will command the invasion of France. Not who will write the plan. Not who will brief the press. Who will stand at the center of the most important Allied operation of the war. An operation that will decide how the conflict ends. How many Americans die on French soil. How long the fighting drags on. And where Soviet tanks will finally stop when Germany collapses. Marshall understands instantly. This is not routine personnel work. This is a fork in the road for the entire 20th century. For months, nearly everyone in Washington and London had assumed the job would go to Marshall himself. It seemed obvious. Since 1939, Marshall has built the United States Army from a small peacetime force into a war machine measured in millions. Divisions spreading across oceans and continents. He has chosen commanders. Replaced failures. Pushed reforms. Coordinated strategy with an iron calm that makes panicked men steadier just by standing in the same room. Churchill calls him the organizer of victory. And Churchill does not hand out compliments like medals. The invasion of France is the culmination of everything Marshall has built. Troops trained. Divisions formed. Equipment produced. Plans refined. Roosevelt wants Marshall for it. Or at least, Roosevelt wants the comfort of knowing the best man has the job. But Roosevelt also knows a brutal truth. He cannot afford to lose Marshall in Washington. The entire global war effort depends on Marshall's oversight. The way he holds the Joint Chiefs together. The way he balances demands from Europe against the Pacific. The way he manages Congress, production, manpower, and priorities without losing control of the bigger picture. Roosevelt admits it with the kind of honesty that rarely appears in public speeches. He tells Marshall he does not feel he could sleep at ease if Marshall were out of Washington. That sentence, quiet and personal, carries the weight of a decision that will shape every battlefield from Normandy to Berlin. So the command goes to Lieutenant General Dwight D. Eisenhower. The Allied commander in the Mediterranean. A man who, just a short while earlier, had never commanded troops in combat at all. Eisenhower spent the First World War training soldiers in Pennsylvania rather than fighting in Europe. His career was built on staff work. Planning. Diplomacy. Administration. He is competent. Calm. Cautious. And most importantly, he can manage people. He can sit between rival egos and make them believe they are being respected even when they are being overruled. He can compromise without looking weak. He can speak to Churchill without inflaming British pride. He can speak to Americans without sounding like a British puppet. He is, in a way that matters more than battlefield glamour, safe. That decision shocks many officers who live closer to the front than to the political map. If the invasion of France requires brilliance, aggression, and the killer instinct to break Germany fast, why not choose the most successful American battlefield commander alive? Why not George S. Patton? The man German generals fear more than any other Allied commander. At that moment, Patton is building a combat record that seems almost mythic. He helped rescue the North African campaign after disaster. He drove his troops with a speed that embarrassed Allied timetables. He took objectives others said would take months. And he did it with a ruthless confidence that makes soldiers follow him into hell believing they might actually win. But Patton is not even considered for Supreme Allied Commander. Not debated seriously. Not weighed and rejected after careful thought. He is never truly in the conversation. To the public, that might sound insane. To the men managing the alliance, it makes cold sense. Patton can win battles brilliantly. But supreme command requires something else entirely. It requires coalition politics. It requires restraint. It requires the ability to swallow pride. To speak carefully. To avoid humiliating allies. To accept strategic compromises that are militarily imperfect but politically necessary. Patton not only struggles with those requirements. He despises them. And here is what most people miss. This is not primarily about the hospital slapping incidents that explode into public scandal. Those episodes become a convenient headline and an easy moral explanation. But the deeper reason exists long before. Marshall knows Patton. Eisenhower knows Patton. Roosevelt understands enough to trust the judgment of men who have worked with him. They all understand that Patton is an operational genius and at the same time, a diplomatic hazard. Brilliant with armor. Catastrophic in a room full of allies. Supreme command means managing Churchill's pride. De Gaulle's bitterness. British fears of American domination. American impatience with British caution. Soviet pressure for a second front. It means building consensus among commanders who disagree about strategy. Then presenting unity to the world even when unity is fragile. It means, at times, making suboptimal military choices to keep the coalition from cracking. Patton cannot do that. He does not want to do that. And the men in Washington and London cannot gamble the alliance on a commander who treats diplomacy like a nuisance. So Roosevelt chooses Eisenhower. Patton will spend the war executing other people's frameworks. Commanding armies with devastating skill inside boundaries set by others. He will prove again and again that his aggressive instincts can shorten campaigns and break enemy forces faster. But he will never have the authority to shape grand strategy. Because the highest levels made a calculation. The manager who could hold the alliance together mattered more than the warrior who could win fastest. It was a choice between military efficiency and political necessity. And it would cost lives. To understand why Patton was passed over, you have to understand who he was. Not the polished Hollywood archetype, but the real man. The real strengths. The real danger he represented to any coalition. George Smith Patton Jr. was born in the late 19th century into a wealthy California family with deep military roots and a strong sense of destiny. He attended West Point and graduated in the early 20th century with a reputation for aggression, competitiveness, and a belief that war is the highest test of character. He does not view battle as merely grim duty. He views it as a calling. In the First World War, Patton becomes one of the early American officers to grasp the potential of tanks and mechanized movement. Between wars, while many officers drift through routine assignments, Patton devours military history and treats it as scripture. He reads about Napoleon, Hannibal, Caesar, Alexander. And he does not just study them. He measures himself against them. He believes he understands warfare at a level his contemporaries do not. He believes, with startling sincerity, that he has been reincarnated from earlier warriors and fought at ancient battlefields. He says this out loud. He believes it completely. That kind of thinking sounds absurd until you realize it is fused to relentless discipline that makes him frighteningly effective in war. Patton is profane and endlessly quotable. The kind of commander who can deliver a speech so brutal and vivid that men remember it for the rest of their lives. He wears custom uniforms, polished boots, carries ivory-handled pistols like stage props because he understands something many generals never learn. Image is a weapon. He demands perfection, drives his troops hard, holds everyone under him to standards that seem impossible until they discover they can meet them. He is theatrical. And he knows he is theatrical. But beneath the swagger is insecurity. Patton struggles with dyslexia and finds reading difficult. Humiliatingly so. Especially in an officer corps that worships intellect and polished performance. He compensates by memorizing everything and working obsessively. Devouring material in a way that looks like genius because it is fueled by fear. The aggressive persona is partly real and partly armor. Constructed to hide vulnerability and the terror that others might think he is intellectually inferior. He becomes, in a sense, two men fused together. The brilliant student of war and the performer who refuses to let anyone see weakness. By the time America enters the Second World War, Patton is in his late 50s. He has spent decades training officers in armored warfare. Writing doctrine. Preparing for the kind of mobile campaign he believes modern war demands. He understands mechanized operations better than any American commander of his era. And he is convinced, absolutely convinced, that he has been born for a great war and that history will judge him by what he does when it arrives. The problem is not that Patton lacks intelligence or courage. The problem is that he cannot control himself. He says what he thinks. He insults allies. He ignores orders he dislikes. He competes for glory and publicity. He treats war correspondents as tools and sometimes leaks information to shape narratives in his favor. He is not merely confident. He is combustible. And most importantly, he does not understand coalition politics because he does not respect it. He cares about killing Germans efficiently and winning battles decisively. Everything else feels like theater. Bureaucracy. Weakness. Marshall understands this. Eisenhower understands it even more intimately because he has to manage the alliance daily. They know Patton will win battles and lose allies. They know he is the best combat commander America has and the worst possible choice for a job requiring diplomatic skill. So the decision becomes quietly simple. Use Patton where his strengths matter. Keep him away from situations where his weaknesses could blow up the alliance. Give him armies. Never give him theaters. Let him be a weapon. Not the hand that directs all weapons. In late 1942, Patton receives his first major combat command during Operation Torch. The Allied invasion of North Africa. He leads the Western Task Force at Casablanca in Morocco while other Allied forces land further east. It is not a clean situation. Vichy French forces are defending. The political context is delicate because Roosevelt does not want to drive the French into permanent hostility. Patton is told to minimize casualties and avoid excessive force. Patton's instinct is always the same. Speed and shock save lives in the long run. He hits hard. Overwhelms resistance quickly. Within days, Casablanca falls. It is a military success and a political headache wrapped together. The beginning of a pattern that will repeat throughout the war. The real test comes the following year after the disaster at Kasserine Pass. American forces are badly defeated and humiliated in Tunisia. German commanders exploit American inexperience. Morale collapses. Allied leaders begin questioning whether American troops can fight effectively against veteran German units. Eisenhower needs someone to restore order, discipline, and confidence fast. He sends Patton to take command of 2nd Corps. Patton arrives in early March 1943 and transforms the unit like a man snapping a whip. He enforces uniform standards. Demands discipline. Punishes cowardice. Fires commanders who hesitate. Personally visits forward positions with the kind of presence that tells every soldier you will fight and you will win because there is no other option. Within weeks, the Corps is different. American troops stop retreating and start holding ground. Patton leads attacks that blunt German countermoves and restore pride. He does not just win tactically. He wins psychologically. After humiliation, he gives American troops their belief back. He demonstrates to British commanders that Americans can fight. That under aggressive leadership, they can stand against German veterans. Marshall and Eisenhower take note. Patton is invaluable on the battlefield. But even in North Africa, the political problem keeps surfacing. Patton competes with British commanders for glory. He resents taking orders from Eisenhower. He gives interviews without authorization. He complains loudly about supplies. He makes it clear he believes he should be in charge of far more than he is given. Eisenhower has to smooth conflicts. Explain Patton's remarks. Manage the diplomatic damage. Patton delivers results. But he creates friction everywhere he moves. Then comes Sicily in the summer of 1943. The Allies invade to knock Italy out of the war and set conditions for the future invasion of France. Patton commands the United States 7th Army. Montgomery commands the British 8th Army. Eisenhower commands overall. The plan gives Montgomery the primary route and assigns Patton a supporting role protecting the flank. It is designed to let experienced British forces lead while American forces learn. Patton hates it. He sees it as British arrogance and American timidity. In his mind, the war is not just a struggle against Germany. It is also a test of national prestige. And he wants American forces to dominate. So he decides, without saying it openly, to race Montgomery to Messina. If he arrives first, he can prove American superiority and establish himself as the star of Allied victory. Patton drives his troops relentlessly along Sicily's western and northern routes. He captures Palermo rapidly. He pushes his divisions with minimal rest and accepts higher casualties in exchange for speed. And in mid-August 1943, Patton's forces reach Messina before Montgomery's. Entering the city only hours ahead. It is a stunning achievement and a public relations triumph. American newspapers celebrate him. He becomes a symbol of American military energy. The general who moves faster than anyone else. The warrior in polished boots and harsh words who always seems to be where the enemy least wants him. But Sicily also exposes Patton's recklessness and the darker edge of his personality. He pushes men beyond physical limits. He accepts casualties that might have been reduced with a slower approach. He turns coalition warfare into personal competition. And then, in the heat of that campaign, Patton does something that nearly destroys his career. Something that reveals the kind of judgment problem that terrifies leaders thinking about coalition command. In early August 1943, Patton visits an evacuation hospital where soldiers suffering from combat exhaustion are being treated. He approaches a young private with no visible wounds who tells him he cannot take the shelling anymore. Patton explodes. He calls him a coward. Strikes him. Threatens him. Demands he be sent back to the front. Medical staff intervene. Days later, Patton repeats the performance at another hospital. Slapping another soldier suffering from psychological collapse. Humiliating him. Treating combat fatigue as weakness rather than injury. Word spreads up the chain of command. Eisenhower learns quickly. War correspondents learn too but temporarily hold the story while Eisenhower decides what to do. Eisenhower faces an impossible decision. Patton is the most successful American combat commander in the theater. The Allies are preparing for a war that will require every advantage. But Patton has assaulted soldiers in a hospital. Men who were wounded in ways not visible to the eye. He has violated both regulations and basic human judgment. By the book, he should be relieved and court-martialed. Eisenhower makes a political calculation. He reprimands Patton privately. Orders him to apologize broadly. Keeps him in place. Believing Patton is too valuable to lose before the invasion of France. When the story becomes public months later, the American public erupts with outrage. Politicians demand punishment. Veterans groups demand accountability. Letters flood Washington. The scandal gives Marshall and Roosevelt something they can point to if anyone asks why Patton will never be trusted with the highest command. But the deeper truth is that Patton's disqualification existed long before those incidents became headlines. The slapping simply provides public justification for what leadership already believes. Patton's judgment, temperament, and disregard for political consequences make him unsuitable for supreme command. So while Roosevelt makes his decision at the end of 1943, the shape of the hierarchy becomes clear. Marshall will remain in Washington. Eisenhower will take Supreme Allied Command. Bradley will lead the main American Army Group. Patton will command armies under them. Unleashed on the enemy. Restrained by superiors. Powerful but not allowed to steer the entire coalition. The official appointment comes near the end of 1943. The public narrative praises Eisenhower's organizational ability and diplomatic skill. Some question his limited combat experience. But the higher leadership judges that experience is not the defining requirement. Supreme command of overlord is not just about moving divisions. It is about managing nations. Pride. Fragile cooperation. Eisenhower can do that. Patton cannot. And nobody in the newspapers asks the question that will haunt soldiers in foxholes later. Whether political reliability is being valued above battlefield efficiency. And how many men will die because the alliance demands compromise. Then the war in France begins. And Patton does what Patton always does when given a mission. He makes it bigger. Faster. More dangerous. And often more successful than anyone expected. When Operation Cobra breaks the German line in Normandy in late July 1944, the front finally opens. After weeks of hedgerow slaughter, the Germans reel. Patton's Third Army becomes operational in early August 1944 with a mission that on paper looks conservative. Exploit the breakthrough. Move into Brittany. Secure ports. Stabilize logistics. Then push deeper. Patton looks at that plan and sees yesterday's thinking. The Germans in Normandy are cracking. Their cohesion is collapsing. The opportunity is not in ports. It is in pursuit. Paris is vulnerable. The German frontier is exposed. Patton understands that if the Allies move fast enough, they might turn retreat into rout. And rout into strategic collapse. He complies with the letter of his orders just enough to protect himself. Sending part of his forces toward Brittany while he drives the rest east like a spear thrown at Germany's chest. It is a gamble. Bold. Arguably insubordinate in spirit. Executed with the speed of a man racing not just the enemy but also his own headquarters. Patton advances hundreds of miles in weeks. Liberating cities. Capturing prisoners. Breaking German formations that cannot form coherent defenses fast enough. He stretches supply lines to the edge of catastrophe and keeps moving anyway. When he is ordered to halt at a river line and wait, he finds loopholes. Reconnaissance in force that becomes bridgeheads. Bridgeheads that become entire divisions across. Temporary expansions that become fait accompli. By the end of August, his forces are far beyond where cautious planning expected them to be. Eisenhower is furious because Patton's behavior does not just threaten Patton's own army. It disrupts the entire theater's logistics. Patton consumes fuel and supplies allocated for other armies. He advances so far that his flanks are exposed. He creates the kind of operational imbalance that could lead to disaster if the Germans recover and counterattack. Bradley, Patton's superior, struggles to restrain him without destroying the momentum Patton's advance has created. But Eisenhower also cannot punish Patton the way a commander might punish disobedience in peacetime. Because Patton's gamble works. France is collapsing for Germany faster than expected. The Allies surge forward. Patton's success shortens the campaign. Embarrasses German commanders. Makes cautious planning look timid. And that is the point that mattered to Roosevelt and Marshall when they chose Eisenhower. Patton is willing to bend or ignore guidance if he believes victory demands it. That trait makes him lethal as an army commander. It makes him dangerous as a theater commander. Because in supreme command, reckless brilliance could fracture alliances. Create diplomatic crises. Potentially sabotage strategic goals even while winning battles. Eisenhower values Patton as a subordinate and would have feared him as the man in charge. Then the supply crisis hits. And it forces Eisenhower into the kind of decision that proves why supreme command is as political as it is military. By early September 1944, Allied armies are moving faster than supplies can follow. The logistical pipeline strains. Fuel becomes the bottleneck. Eisenhower has to decide which thrust will be prioritized. And whichever thrust he prioritizes will shape the entire autumn campaign. Patton argues Third Army should receive fuel because he is closest to Germany's vulnerable points. He believes he can reach the Rhine quickly. Crack into Germany before defenses solidify. Potentially end the war before winter. Bradley supports him because Bradley sees Patton's momentum and believes the enemy is still reeling. Montgomery in the North demands priority for his own plan. An airborne and ground operation through the Netherlands designed to seize bridges and outflank German defenses. That plan promises a dramatic breakthrough and a British-led spear into Germany. Eisenhower chooses the northern priority. He gives Montgomery's forces precedence in fuel and supplies. Approves the gamble. The decision is not purely military. It is alliance management. Churchill wants British prestige secured. British public opinion bristles at American dominance. Montgomery pushes hard for a lead role and threatens political turmoil. Eisenhower believes coalition unity matters more than perfect tactical logic. And he believes that if he does not balance national prestige, the alliance might crack. Patton protests and predicts disaster. He argues that stopping now will let Germans regroup. Build defenses. Lengthen the war. He warns that a high-risk northern gamble could consume resources without delivering decisive victory. He is overruled. Patton's army slows. Montgomery's operation launches in mid-September 1944. And fails at great cost. Airborne troops are trapped. Bridges are lost. Thousands become casualties for gains that do not justify the expense. But the deeper cost is not only in the Netherlands. It is in the weeks and months that follow when American soldiers have to fight through fortified defenses later because opportunities to outflank them earlier were missed. It is in the winter catastrophe that comes when Germany, given time to recover, launches its final offensive in the Ardennes. It is in the grim arithmetic of casualties that could never be fully measured. And this is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because it forces you to look at the central dilemma. Eisenhower kept the alliance together. That was his mission. He performed it brilliantly. But keeping the alliance together sometimes required decisions that were not optimal for saving American lives. Patton, by contrast, was built for the battlefield. He wanted the fastest route to German destruction. And he did not care whose pride was bruised along the way. The question nobody asked the families receiving telegrams was whether alliance harmony was worth their sons. The tension between Patton's aggression and coalition caution appears again in one of the most controversial moments of the Normandy campaign. The attempt to close the Falaise pocket where German forces are trapped and could be destroyed in France. American and British forces converge. There is a narrow gap through which German units can escape. Patton wants to close it quickly. He believes he can trap enormous numbers of Germans. Wipe out the organized core of German resistance in the West. End the campaign with decisive destruction rather than messy retreat. Bradley refuses to let Patton push further. Worried about coordination failures and friendly fire between converging Allied forces. He also worries about political fallout with Montgomery if American forces push too aggressively into zones where coalition coordination is already strained. Patton argues the risk is worth it. He pleads. He warns. He believes it is a historic opportunity. Bradley holds firm. The gap is not closed in time. Tens of thousands of German troops escape, retreating east to form the hardened core of later defenses. Those escaping soldiers are not just numbers. They are experienced infantry and armored crews who will fight again against Americans in forests, on rivers, in the snow. Patton believes this is what happens when political caution and alliance sensitivity override military opportunity. He believes that if he had the authority to decide, he would have accepted the risks. Closed the trap. Shortened the war. Many historians have argued the opportunity was real, even if they debate how cleanly it could have been executed. But the coalition structure does what it always does. It favors safety, coordination, the avoidance of humiliation. That choice keeps the alliance steadier. It also lets enemies survive to kill more men later. Then comes the Ardennes offensive in mid-December 1944. Germany launches its last major attack in the West. Allied intelligence did not fully anticipate it. The weather grounds air power. Thinly held lines buckle. Units are surrounded. Towns become desperate strongpoints. Eisenhower calls an emergency meeting at Verdun in late December. Commanders gather in a freezing room under the weight of catastrophe. Eisenhower asks the question that matters. How soon can anyone attack to relieve pressure and restore the front? Most commanders, doing sober arithmetic of winter roads, redeployments, and supply lines, speak in terms of days and weeks. Patton says he can attack within 48 hours. The room goes quiet. Because it sounds impossible. Patton's army is oriented differently. To strike the bulge, he would have to disengage. Pivot. March through winter storms. Launch a coordinated attack quickly. Patton explains that he has prepared for this possibility. He has ordered his staff to draft contingency plans in advance. He has multiple attack options ready depending on where he is needed. All he requires is the order. Eisenhower gives it. And Patton moves with a speed that stuns everyone. Within days, Third Army has pivoted and struck the German flank. The movement is one of the most impressive operational redeployments of the war. A demonstration of staff work and command urgency fused together. Patton's forces fight forward through brutal winter conditions. Eventually break through to relieve trapped units. Helping to blunt Germany's final gamble. Even Eisenhower, who often clashed with Patton, cannot deny the achievement. Patton's response proves what his supporters always claimed. When crises demand speed and audacity, Patton delivers. Yet the bulge also highlights the consequences of earlier strategic choices. The Germans had been able to assemble reserves and strike because the war had not ended earlier. Because opportunities had been missed. Because supply allocations and priorities had stretched the campaign into winter when the enemy could gamble on weather and surprise. Patton had warned that letting the Germans breathe would lead to exactly this. And tens of thousands paid the price. As the war approaches its end in the spring of 1945, the question shifts from how to defeat Germany to what the victory will mean politically. Soviet forces surge from the east. The Western Allies advance from the west. The prize is Berlin. Not just as a military objective but as a symbol of who will shape post-war Europe. Patton wants to race for it. He believes that occupying Berlin will give the United States leverage and limit Soviet domination. He believes the post-war order will be shaped by where armies stand when Germany collapses. Eisenhower chooses differently. He avoids a costly race that could create friction with Stalin at the moment the alliance still needs Soviet cooperation. Occupation zones have been discussed and agreed upon at higher political levels. Eisenhower treats those agreements as binding. He orders Western forces to halt short rather than push for Berlin at the cost of huge casualties. Patton protests furiously. He believes it is a strategic mistake that will hand Eastern Europe to Soviet control. He predicts the Iron Curtain before it becomes a phrase. History proves Patton right about Soviet intentions. But that does not mean his preferred solution was politically feasible. Preventing Soviet domination of Eastern Europe would not have required just symbolism. It would have required confronting Soviet armies occupying those territories. Risking conflict with a wartime ally immediately after Germany's defeat. Roosevelt and Churchill are not willing to do that. Eisenhower, acting in line with political leadership, prioritizes ending the war without igniting a new one. Patton thinks in military position and momentum. Eisenhower thinks in coalition maintenance and political strategy. That difference is the same difference that kept Patton away from supreme command from the beginning. After Germany surrenders in early May 1945, Patton is given a role that requires everything he lacks. Political restraint. Careful speech. Diplomatic sensitivity. He becomes military governor in a German region. Overseeing civilians. Administrators. The early stages of occupation policy. Patton quickly generates controversy. He is slow to remove former regime members from administrative roles, arguing that experienced bureaucrats are necessary to keep society functioning. He makes comments that equate the ruling party of the defeated regime with ordinary political parties, treating ideological crimes as mere politics. Allied officials are horrified. Because the occupation policy is not merely about efficiency. It is about dismantling the structures that enabled atrocity. Patton also speaks openly about confronting the Soviet Union. Even suggests rearming Germans against the former ally. Whether his strategic instinct is correct is a separate question. The immediate problem is that his statements violate official policy and threaten the fragile post-war political balance. Eisenhower, who understands the danger of uncontrolled remarks, removes Patton from the role. Places him in a paper command. An organization focused on writing history rather than shaping events. For Patton, it is humiliating. For Eisenhower, it is necessary. It is the same logic that governed their entire wartime relationship. Patton was too valuable to discard when fighting was needed. Too dangerous to leave unrestrained when politics mattered. In mid-December 1945, Patton suffers catastrophic injuries in a car accident near Mannheim. He dies later that month, ending the life of the war's most explosive American commander before he can see how fully the world shifts into the cold conflict he predicted. The Cold War emerges. Soviet control hardens across Eastern Europe. The divide he warned about becomes reality. Patton supporters will later say this proved he should have been listened to more. His critics will say he lacked the political discipline required to manage such truths responsibly. And this is the heart of the story. Patton was never seriously considered for Supreme Allied Commander because Supreme Command is not an award for the best fighter. It is a job for the best coalition manager. Roosevelt and Marshall chose the commander who could keep the alliance working through victory and into the post-war order. Even if that meant making compromises that cost lives. Patton represented the opposite philosophy. Maximize battlefield efficiency. Strike relentlessly. Worry about politics later. In a national war, that approach can look heroic. In a coalition war, it can be catastrophic. Patton's record was real. He understood operational movement intuitively. He knew how to use speed and aggression to turn enemy retreat into collapse. He could take risks that cautious men would not take. And sometimes those risks paid off spectacularly. But he also competed with allies instead of building partnerships. He said what he thought without measuring consequences. He treated coalition warfare like a contest where American glory mattered as much as defeating Germany. He did not understand that war is fought to achieve political objectives. Not simply to destroy the enemy efficiently. That misunderstanding made him brilliant at execution and dangerous at strategy. Eisenhower, by contrast, was not as lethal a battlefield commander as Patton. He did not have Patton's instinct for opportunity or Patton's hunger for decisive action. But Eisenhower understood something Patton could not accept. That maintaining alliance relationships could matter as much as winning battles quickly. Eisenhower could work with Churchill without igniting diplomatic fires. He could manage de Gaulle's pride without humiliating him. He could keep Stalin cooperating long enough to crush Germany. Those skills were not glamorous. But they were essential. Marshall and Roosevelt valued them because the invasion of France would be an operation of millions. Troops from multiple nations. Air forces. Navies. Intelligence networks. Supply systems. Requiring unity of command without crushing national pride. That unity came at a cost. Political decisions shaped supply allocations. Strategic priorities. Operational limits. Some choices made to preserve coalition harmony extended campaigns and cost lives. Every casualty statistic hides names. Families. Grief. Every delay meant another battle fought. Another winter endured. Another telegram delivered. Patton supporters argue that his aggressive leadership could have ended the fighting sooner and saved lives. They might be right in certain scenarios. But the leaders who chose Eisenhower believed that if Patton had been given supreme authority, he would have risked something even larger than casualties. The stability of the alliance. And the political shape of the peace that followed. The bitter truth is that coalition warfare forces leaders into compromises where military perfection is sacrificed for political survival. The best battlefield commander is not always the right supreme commander. Sometimes the best battlefield commander is not even considered. Patton's story proves that he was America's most dangerous weapon against Germany. And he was deliberately kept away from the lever that controlled the entire machine. He spent the war subordinate to men he considered inferior. And in pure combat terms, he often had evidence to support that belief. But superiority on the battlefield did not equal suitability for coalition leadership. That is why the decision made in Washington after Tehran mattered so much. Roosevelt and Marshall chose the manager over the warrior. They chose alliance cohesion over maximum military efficiency. They accepted that political necessities would sometimes override battlefield logic. Germany was defeated. The alliance held. And the post-war world emerged fractured along lines that Patton had predicted but could not politically navigate. The soldiers who fought and died did not get to vote on those trade-offs. The families who opened War Department telegrams did not get to decide whether keeping allies satisfied was worth the price. Leaders made the calculation. Soldiers paid the cost. George S. Patton Jr. was never in the conversation for supreme command. Not because he could not win battles. But because winning the war required more than winning battles. It required managing pride. Politics. Partnerships among nations that did not trust each other fully even while sharing an enemy. Patton could destroy German armies. He could not hold a coalition together. And in the Second World War, the coalition was the weapon that mattered most.